Hey, everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We're going to be kind of going into something that's both fascinating and a little bit unsettling, the art of seduction.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and we're going to be using Robert Greene's The Art of Seduction as our guide.
Okay.
Now, before anyone thinks this is just about romance, let me stop you right there.
Okay.
This deep dive is about uncovering the timeless strategies that seducers use, not to endorse them,
Right.
but to help you understand this powerful force.
Okay.
Because honestly, these patterns pop up everywhere.
Yeah.
Business, politics, even our personal relationships.
What's fascinating about seduction is that it operates on a level beyond logic. You know, it
Yeah.
targets the unconscious mind.
Right.
And in a world that's just overflowing with information, you know, we crave novelty. We crave mystery.
Right,
That makes seduction incredibly potent.
exactly. We are bombarded with ads and news, social media all day long. Our brains are overloaded.
Right.
So anything that breaks through that noise and speaks to our deeper desires is going to be powerful. And that's where understanding these tactics comes in handy.
Yeah.
Whether it's a charming salesperson, a captivating leader, or yes, a romantic interest, recognizing these patterns helps us navigate the world more effectively.
It's about becoming aware of the game, so
Yeah.
you're not just a pawn in it.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this art of seduction then.
Okay.
Greene introduces all these different archetypes of seducers,
Yeah.
like the siren, the rake, and the ideal lover.
Uh-huh.
What I found interesting is that he doesn't present these as personality judgments,
Right.
but more like tools or strategies.
Think of them as different approaches for tapping into specific desires.
Okay,
Take the siren, for example. It's not just about beauty.
right.
It's about embodying alluring mystery and a touch of danger.
Oh, the siren, Cleopatra, Marilyn Monroe.
Exactly.
Figures who just oozed charisma.
Yes.
It's like they tapped into our fascination with the forbidden, the dangerous.
Right.
Cleopatra's power wasn't just her beauty.
Right.
It was the allure of a foreign queen, a woman who defied Roman expectations.
Yes.
It makes you wonder, is there something inherently seductive about those who break the rules?
It definitely plays a role. Then you have the rake from either Ward Byron or Casanova.
Uh-huh.
They embrace the bad boy image, tapping into those fantasies of rebellion and living outside social norms.
You know, it's funny because while we might intellectually know that a bad boy can be trouble,
Hmm.
there's still something so tempting about that rebellious energy.
Yes.
It makes you wonder if a part of us secretly wants to break free from those conventions too.
Absolutely. It plays on our desire for excitement and pushing boundaries. But
Right.
then you have the ideal lover, which takes a completely different approach.
Right. Instead of rebellion, the ideal lover offers fulfillment mirroring the target's values and aspirations.
Think of Disraeli seducing Queen Victoria.
Oh, wow.
He played to her need for validation, for romance, and for a connection that went beyond the rigid world of politics. By mirroring her desires, he became one of her most trusted confidants.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
It's amazing how seductive that feeling of being truly understood can be.
It is.
It makes you feel seen and validated in a way that few other things can.
Right.
And then there's the dandy, who always seems to disrupt expectations.
The dandy plays with gender roles, creating an ambiguous persona that sparks curiosity and desire.
Think Oscar Wilde or David Bowie, figures who defied categorization.
Yes.
It's like they're offering a glimpse into a world where anything is possible. It makes you wonder, is it our need to label and categorize that makes the ambiguous so fascinating?
That's a great question. It could be that our minds crave the challenge of trying to define something that defies easy categorization.
So we've got all these different types of seducers,
Right.
each with their own unique approach.
Yes.
But what I find even more interesting is how Greene breaks down the actual process of seduction into distinct phases.
He outlines 3 key phases: separation, leading astray, and the bold move.
Okay, let's start with separation.
Okay.
What does that even mean in the context of seduction? I mean, it's not like you're literally kidnapping someone, right?
Right. It's more about stirring up interest and desire,
Okay.
but also about separating the target from their usual surroundings and routines.
Okay.
Imagine creating a kind of bubble where the rules of the outside world don't apply.
So it's about creating a space where seduction can flourish, where the target can let their guard down.
Exactly.
It's like setting the stage for the performance.
And in this phase, Greene emphasizes choosing the right victim.
Hold on. Choosing the right victim.
Yeah.
That sounds a little, well, predatory, doesn't it?
Keep in mind, he's not advocating for manipulation. He's simply explaining how seducers think.
Okay.
And in their minds, the ideal victim is someone who is susceptible to their charms, someone they can fill a void for.
So it's more about finding someone who's receptive to their particular style of seduction?
Yes.
Like Cleopatra choosing powerful Roman leaders as her targets.
Exactly.
She wasn't just seducing anyone. She was going after men who had specific vulnerabilities she could exploit.
Precisely. She understood that the most successful seductions are built on shared desires and vulnerabilities.
Okay.
It's like finding the right key for the right lock.
So you got to find someone who's open to your particular brand of magic.
Yes.
And then you've got to create temptation.
And that's where it gets really interesting. It's not about being obvious or forceful.
Right. It's about subtlety, about hinting at the pleasures to come playing on those unfulfilled fantasies.
Like the serpent tempting Eve with forbidden knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. It's about sparking curiosity, creating intrigue, making them crave something that's just out of reach.
Because the moment someone thinks they know you completely, the spell's broken.
Absolutely. And that's why suspense is so crucial in the next phase, leading astray.
Okay, so you've piqued their interest, created a little bit of temptation. How do you actually lead them astray?
It's about deepening the connection, heightening the pleasure, but also introducing an element of confusion. Think of it like a dance where you're leading, but you're also keeping them guessing, keeping them slightly off balance.
So it's not just about being charming. It's about being unpredictable, keeping them on their toes.
Exactly.
Like a good movie that keeps you guessing until the very end.
Think of Napoleon keeping Josephine on her toes with his unpredictable behavior. He'd shower her with affection, then suddenly withdraw, leaving her wanting more.
That push and pull dynamic can be so addictive, can it?
It can.
It's like you get a hit of pleasure, then you crave another one.
It creates a cycle of anticipation and reward that can be very difficult to resist. And that's precisely what the seducer wants, to create a state of emotional dependency.
Wow. It's starting to feel a little manipulative, isn't it?
It can be, depending on the intentions of the seducer. But remember, these same tactics can be used in less manipulative ways as well.
Right. It's all about how you use these tools and for what purpose.
Exactly. But let's continue exploring these tactics. We've covered creating suspense, but there's also this idea of strategic weakness.
Strategic weakness. Now that sounds counterintuitive. You'd think strength and confidence would be the most seductive qualities, wouldn't you?
You would think so. But appearing vulnerable can actually be incredibly disarming. It lowers the target's defenses, makes them feel needed and powerful.
So it's about appealing to their protective instincts, making them feel like they need to take care of you.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly effective. Casanova was a master of this. He'd pretend to fall apart over a woman, making her believe she had this incredible power over him.
So he was actually playing the victim to draw her in.
He was.
That's pretty sneaky.
Yeah.
And I bet it worked like a charm.
It did. It played right into her vanity, making her more susceptible to his advances. It makes you think, do we all have a bit of a savior complex lurking inside us, just waiting to be exploited?
That's a really good question. So you're building suspense, you're strategically revealing your vulnerabilities. What's the end game here? Where does this all lead?
That brings us to the bold move, the climax of the seduction.
Right, the moment of truth.
Mm.
But it's not just about the act itself, is it? It's about timing, about choosing the right moment.
Right. Absolutely. It's about choosing the right moment when desire is high, but the target is still hesitant. Greene talks about the Duc de Richelieu's perfectly timed bedroom invasion as an example.
Now, that was a bold move. It takes a lot of confidence to pull something like that off.
It does, and it worked because he was able to capitalize on a moment of vulnerability and surprise. But what I find fascinating is that Greene doesn't just leave it at the conquest. He also talks about disenchantment.
Disenchantment. You mean like the feeling of being let down after the initial excitement wears off?
It's more than that. It's about managing the aftermath of the seduction, how to gracefully exit the seduction stage without creating chaos or clinginess.
Right, because you don't want to leave a trail of broken hearts and bitter exes in your wake.
Exactly. And Greene suggests that the aftermath of the seduction is just as important as the seduction itself.
So you've got to have an exit strategy.
You do.
It's like a magician making a grand exit after the final act.
Precisely. And there are a few different approaches.
Like Ellington's smooth moves. He was notorious for his ability to charm his way in and out of relationships without any drama. He'd leave a lasting impression without ever making any promises or commitments.
He understood the importance of leaving them wanting more, of creating a sense of longing that would linger long after he was gone.
A true artist of seduction. But then you have the opposite approach, deliberately creating distance, like Kierkegaard's Johannes in The Seducer's Diary.
That's a more calculated approach designed to leave the target longing for what they can't have. It plays on our fear of loss and our desire for what's just out of reach.
So even the ending of a seduction can be a carefully orchestrated performance. Wow, this whole art of seduction is really making me think. It's like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Well, there's definitely a lot more to explore. But before we dive into the next phase, what stands out to you so far? What are you finding most surprising or intriguing?
What I find fascinating is how Greene brings these seduction techniques to life, using historical figures and real-world examples. It's not just abstract theory. It's about seeing these patterns play out in actual human interactions.
Yeah.
It really brings it home for me,
Absolutely. It makes it so much more relatable and engaging. I never really thought about Napoleon's military strategies as a form of seduction.
Right.
But when you see how he used surprise and unpredictability to keep his opponents off balance, it's like, I see what Greene's getting at.
Right. It's about recognizing those same psychological principles at work in different contexts.
Okay. So we've covered the basic phases of seduction.
Yeah.
But Greene goes deeper than that, doesn't he?
He does.
He talks about specific tactics and strategies that seducers use to really draw people in.
He does. And one of the most intriguing ones is this idea of entering their spirit. Okay, entering their spirit. That sounds a little spooky. What does that even mean?
It's not about possession or anything like that.
Okay.
It's about adapting to the target's moods and preferences, playing by their rules, and essentially becoming a chameleon that blends seamlessly into their world.
So it's about making them feel like you understand them on a deep level, like you're on the same wavelength, almost like you're reading their mind. That's pretty powerful stuff.
It is, and it's incredibly effective because it strokes their ego and makes them feel seen and understood. Yeah. Remember the example of the serpent tempting Eve?
Oh, right. The serpent didn't just offer Eve any old apple. He offered her the one that would appeal to her specific curiosity and desire for knowledge.
It was a perfectly tailored temptation designed to play on her unique vulnerabilities. Yeah. And that's the key to entering their spirit. It's not just about figuring out what someone wants. It's about figuring out what they secretly want, what they might not even admit to themselves.
So it's about paying attention to those subtle cues, those little hints that reveal what's really going on beneath the surface. It's like being a detective of desire.
Yes, and it requires careful observation. Think of Madame de Pompadour, the mistress of King Louis XVI.
Oh, she was a master seductress.
Really?
She kept the king captivated for years, which is no small feat.
And she did it by constantly adapting to his moods, indulging his whims, and creating an atmosphere of pleasure and delight.
I remember reading that she even redecorated her rooms to match his changing tastes. Talk about commitment.
Right. It was all about creating a seductive environment that catered to his every desire.
This makes me think about how we present ourselves online on social media. It's like we're all curating these images of ourselves, trying to project a certain persona. And it's often a very calculated performance, isn't it? We're choosing the right photos, the right words, trying to appeal to a specific audience. It's like a modern-day version of entering their spirit, adapted for the digital age.
I think that's a really insightful connection. And it makes you think about how we're all susceptible to this kind of manipulation, whether we realize it or not. It's almost like we're all playing this game of seduction online, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
That's kind of unsettling, isn't it? But I guess that's why it's so important to understand these tactics. It gives you a critical lens through which to view these interactions, both online and offline.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Okay, so we've talked about entering their spirit, creating temptation, building suspense. What's next on the seducer's playbook?
Well, Greene talks about the importance of confusing desire and reality. It's about creating a seductive illusion that the target can get lost in a fantasy world where their dreams can come true.
So it's about tapping into those unfulfilled desires, those secret longings that we all have. It's like the seducer is offering a glimpse of paradise, even if it's ultimately an illusion.
Exactly. And they do this by blurring the lines between what's real and what's imagined. Think of those classic romantic movies where two people from completely different worlds fall in love.
Right, like Pretty Woman or The Notebook. It's a fantasy that plays on our desire for escape, for a love that transcends the ordinary.
But of course, in real life, those kinds of relationships rarely last because the illusion eventually fades and you're left with the reality of who that person actually is.
It's like the difference between falling in love with the idea of someone versus falling in love with the actual person.
Precisely. And that's why maintaining the illusion is so crucial for the seducer. If the fantasy bubble bursts, the spell is broken.
So how do they keep the illusion going?
Well, Greene talks about a few different tactics, including the use of what he calls spiritual lures.
Spiritual lures. Okay, now we're getting really deep. What are those?
It's about appealing to the target's higher aspirations, making the seduction seem like something more than just a physical or emotional connection. It's like dressing up lust as love, or even something divine.
So it's about making the seduction seem more profound, more meaningful than it actually is. I can see how that would be incredibly effective, especially for people who are seeking something deeper than just a superficial connection.
Exactly. It takes the focus off the baser instincts and elevates the seduction to something almost spiritual.
But it's still manipulation, isn't it? It's just a more sophisticated form of deception.
That's the thing about seduction. It often walks a fine line between genuine connection and calculated manipulation. And it can be difficult to tell the difference, especially when you're caught up in the moment.
Right. It's all about the seducer's intentions. Are they genuinely interested in the other person, or are they just using them for their own gratification? I guess that's the ultimate question, isn't it?
It is, and it's not always an easy question to answer.
Hey.
But let's delve into a few more tactics. Greene also talks about the importance of regression.
Regression, like going back in time.
In a way, yes. It's about triggering those childhood memories and emotions that are often associated with feelings of safety, security, and unconditional love.
Ah, so it's about tapping into those primal needs, that we all have those longings for a time when we felt completely loved and cared for. It's like the seducer is offering a return to innocence, a safe haven from the harsh realities of the world.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly seductive, especially for people who are feeling lost or vulnerable. He uses the example of a seducer positioning themselves as the child in a relationship.
So they're not trying to be the strong, protective partner, but rather the one who needs to be taken care of.
Precisely. And that can be incredibly disarming for the target. It makes them feel needed, powerful, and in control.
It's like a reversal of roles, isn't it? The seducer is actually the one being seduced in a way.
In a sense, yes. It's a brilliant tactic that plays on our deeply ingrained need to nurture and protect. But like many of these tactics, it can be used for good or for ill.
Right. It all depends on the intentions behind it.
Yeah.
It makes you think about those relationships where one person is constantly taking care of the other, even to their own detriment. It can be a very seductive dynamic, but it can also be very unhealthy if it's not balanced.
Absolutely, because it can be a sign that one person is exploiting the other's vulnerabilities. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these patterns so you can recognize when you're being manipulated or when you might be unconsciously manipulating someone else.
Right. It's about becoming more conscious of these dynamics and making sure they're balanced and healthy.
Exactly. Awareness is key. Now, there's another tactic that Greene discusses that we should explore: transgression.
Transgression. That sounds a little dangerous.
It can be, but it's also incredibly effective in the right hands.
Because there's a part of us that's drawn to the forbidden right, the things we're not supposed to want.
Precisely. It's that thrill of breaking the rules, of experiencing something outside the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Think of Lord Byron's scandalous reputation. It only seemed to make him more attractive to women.
That's so true. People were fascinated by him even though they knew he was trouble. It's like that bad boy energy we were talking about earlier. It's dangerous, but also exciting and alluring.
Exactly. Lord Byron cultivated that image of the rebel, the outcast, the one who defied social conventions. And it worked because that danger was part of his allure. It made him seem exciting, unpredictable, and completely irresistible.
So it's not just about being good or bad. It's about creating that aura of transgression, of being a little bit dangerous, a little bit unpredictable. It's like a spice that adds flavor to the seduction.
That's a great way to put it. It's about creating a sense of excitement and intrigue that goes beyond the ordinary.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about entering their spirit, creating temptation, confusing desire and reality, using spiritual lures, regression, transgression. I feel like I need a cheat sheet to keep track of all these tactics.
Yeah.
It's amazing how complex this whole art of seduction really is.
It is complex, but what's important is that you start to see these patterns playing out in your own life and your own relationships. The more you can recognize these tactics, the more empowered you'll be in navigating your interactions with others.
Right. It's not about becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone, but rather about developing a deeper understanding of human behavior and motivation.
Exactly. It's about becoming a more conscious participant in the game of life.
Okay, before we move on to the next section, I'm curious, does Greene talk about how to create an overall seductive persona? Like, is there a way to cultivate those qualities that make someone irresistible?
He does. And one of the key elements of that persona is what he calls poetic presence-absence.
Okay, poetic presence-absence.
Okay, poetic presence absence. That sounds pretty abstract. Can you break that down for me?
It's about creating a sense of mystery and intrigue by alternating between presence and absence, between hot and cold. It's like creating a rhythm of anticipation and longing.
Ah, so it's that push and pull dynamic again, keeping the target guessing, keeping them off balance and wanting more.
Exactly. It's about creating a sense of scarcity and making your presence feel like a special treat.
Think of Eva Peron.
Oh, she was a master of this.
She cultivated this image of both glamour and accessibility, of being both a powerful political figure and a woman of the people.
And she did it by carefully controlling her public image, by alternating between grand public appearances and strategic periods of withdrawal.
It's like she was always just out of reach, which it only made people crave her presence even more. Exactly. It's that sense of, I can't have you all the time, that drives desire.
It's like those limited edition products that everyone goes crazy for. The harder they are to get, the more we want them. It's a basic principle of human psychology.
Absolutely. And it applies just as much to seduction as it does to marketing.
Okay, so you're creating that poetic presence absence, that sense of mystery and intrigue. What else goes into crafting a seductive persona?
Well, Greene also talks about the importance of using physical lures.
Okay, that sounds a little more straightforward. What does he mean by physical lures?
It's about using your physical presence to stir up desire and arousal in the target. It's not just about being attractive, it's about using your body language, your voice, your touch to create a sensual experience.
So it's about creating a charged atmosphere that bypasses the target's rational mind and appeals directly to their senses. It's like creating a spell with your physical presence.
Exactly. Think of Marlene Dietrich's smoky voice and sultry gaze. She was a master of using physical lures to create an aura of sexual magnetism.
And it worked. She was one of the most captivating actresses of her time. But it's not just about overt sexuality, is it? It's also about those subtle cues, those little touches that create a sense of intimacy and connection.
You're right. It's about those lingering glances, whispers in the ear, or brushes of the hand. It's those little things that can get under someone's skin and make them feel incredibly desired.
You know, it's amazing how much we rely on nonverbal communication, especially in those early stages of attraction. It's often those subtle cues, those unspoken signals, that create the spark of desire.
Absolutely. Words are only a small part of the equation.
Okay, so you're using physical lures, you're creating that poetic presence absence. What's the final piece of the puzzle when it comes to crafting a seductive persona?
Well, Greene talks about the importance of mastering the art of the bold move.
Right, we talked about that earlier. It's about choosing the right moment to make your move to take the seduction to the next level.
Yeah.
But you're saying there's more to it than just timing.
There is. It's not just about choosing the right moment. It's also about execution. It's about making your move with confidence, assertiveness, and a certain level of irresistible charm.
So it's not just about what you do, but how you do it. It's about having that certain je ne sais quoi that makes you stand out from the crowd.
Exactly. The bold move should be a culmination of all the previous stages, a moment of overwhelming desire and surrender. Greene uses the example of the Duc de Richelieu sneaking into a duchess's bedroom after a prank gone wrong.
That was definitely a bold move.
Yeah.
Not sure I'd recommend that approach to everyone, but it clearly worked for him.
It did. And it worked because he was able to capitalize on a moment of vulnerability and surprise. He had the confidence to seize the opportunity and make his move.
So confidence is key. But what happens after the bold move? Does the seduction just end there?
That's a great question. And it brings us to one of the most overlooked aspects of seduction disenchantment.
Right, we touched on that earlier. It's about managing the aftermath of the seduction, about how to gracefully exit the seduction stage without creating chaos or clinginess.
Exactly. It's about leaving them with a positive impression without creating any unnecessary drama or heartbreak.
So it's like a magician making a grand exit after the final act.
Precisely. And there are a few different approaches to disenchantment.
We talked about Ellington's smooth moves earlier. He was a master of leaving his lovers with a fond memory without ever making any promises or commitments. He'd leave them wanting more, creating a sense of longing that would linger long after he was gone.
He was a true artist of the graceful exit. But then you have the opposite approach, deliberately creating distance like Kierkegaard's Johann.
Right. That's a more calculated approach, designed to make the target feel insecure and desperate for your attention. It plays on our fear of loss and makes us want what we can't have.
Exactly. It's all part of the game.
Wow, this is a lot to take in. It's fascinating, but also a little bit overwhelming. I feel like I'm just beginning to understand the complexities of seduction.
It is a lot to process, but I think the most important takeaway is that you're starting to see these patterns, these strategies playing out in your own life, in your own relationships, that awareness is key.
Because once you recognize them, you can start to make more conscious choices about how you want to engage in these dynamics. Whether you choose to use them, resist them, or simply observe them, knowledge is power.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, I think it's time we shift gears and explore how to defend ourselves against these tactics. After all, we don't want to just be passive players in this game of seduction, do we?
All right, so we've spent the last hour or so really unpacking Robert Greene's The Art of Seduction. And to be honest, I'm feeling a little vulnerable now.
I understand. It's unsettling to realize just how susceptible we can be to manipulation, even from people we think we trust.
Exactly. So how do we protect ourselves? How do we spot these seduction tactics before it's too late? What are the warning signs?
One of the biggest red flags is when someone is showering you with an unusual amount of attention, especially early on in a relationship.
You mean like overwhelming you with compliments, gifts, invitations? It all seems too good to be true.
Exactly. And while it can feel flattering, it can also be a tactic to create a sense of obligation, to make you feel indebted to them.
So what do? Just reject all compliments and gifts? That seems a little extreme.
No, it's not about being rude. It's about being aware of the potential motives behind those gestures. Ask yourself, what do they want from me?
So if someone is being overly generous, maybe take a step back and consider their intentions.
Exactly. And be wary of anyone who is trying to move too fast too soon. They might be trying to rush you into a decision before you've had time to think things through.
Right, like those whirlwind romances that start with intense passion and end just as quickly. They're exciting, but they can also be really dangerous.
We are. Because you're not giving yourself time to really get to know the person, to see them for who they truly are beneath the surface charm.
So watch out for excessive attention and things moving too fast.
Yeah.
What else should we be on the lookout for?
Pay attention to how they talk about themselves. Seducers often try to create an aura of mystery and intrigue.
So they might be vague about their past, their work, their relationships. It's all a bit hazy.
Exactly. They want to keep you guessing, to make you fill in the blanks with your own fantasies and projections.
It's almost like a blank canvas can be more alluring than a fully finished painting. You can imagine it to be whatever you want.
That's a great way to put it. And they'll often try to present themselves as the victim, as someone who's been misunderstood or wronged.
It's like they're trying to evoke your sympathy to make you feel sorry for them.
Exactly. And that can be a powerful tool for manipulation. Because once you start feeling sorry for someone, you're more likely to let your guard down.
It's like those scam artists who prey on elderly people by pretending to be their friend or confidant.
That's a perfect example. It's a classic tactic for exploiting people's vulnerabilities.
Okay, so watch out for excessive attention. Things moving too fast, a vague or mysterious past, and attempts to evoke your sympathy. This is starting to feel a bit like a paranoia checklist.
I understand. But remember, it's not about becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone. It's about becoming aware. The more aware you are of these tactics, the less likely you are to be manipulated by them.
So knowledge is power, as they say.
Absolutely. The more you understand about the art of seduction, the more empowered you become to resist it when necessary.
Okay, but awareness is only part of the equation, right? What about taking action? How do we actually defend ourselves against these master seducers?
There's another crucial aspect to self-defense that we haven't talked about yet, setting boundaries.
That sounds essential. But how do you actually do that, especially when you're dealing with someone who's skilled at pushing boundaries and manipulating others?
It starts with knowing yourself, being clear about your own values and priorities.
So knowing what you want and what you're not willing to compromise on.
Exactly. And then communicating those boundaries clearly and assertively.
So if someone is pushing you to do something you're not comfortable with, you need to say no and mean it.
Exactly. And be prepared to walk away if they don't respect your boundaries.
That can be really hard, especially if you're already feeling emotionally invested in the person or if you're afraid of hurting their feelings.
I understand. It's not easy, but it's crucial for protecting yourself from manipulation and exploitation. Your well-being is worth it.
So self-defense is not just about recognizing the tactics. It's also about having the strength and self-respect to stand up for yourself.
Exactly. And that can take time and practice, but it's a skill worth developing.
It's like learning a martial art. You've got to train your mind and body to react in a way that protects you from harm.
I like that analogy because self-defense isn't about being aggressive. It's about being assertive, about knowing your own strength and using it wisely.
So we've got awareness and we've got boundaries. Is there anything else we could do to protect ourselves from these master seducers?
I think it's important to remember that not everyone who uses these tactics is intentionally trying to harm you.
Right. We've been talking about seduction in this very strategic, almost Machiavellian way,
Yeah.
but not everyone who uses these techniques is a master manipulator or has ill intentions.
Exactly. Most people aren't master manipulators. They might be using some of these tactics unconsciously without even realizing it.
So it's not always about malicious intent. It could just be clumsiness in experience or even a lack of self-awareness.
Precisely. And that's why communication is so important. If you feel like someone is crossing a line, talk to them about it.
So instead of jumping to conclusions, have an open and honest conversation about how their behavior is making you feel.
Yes, explain what you need from them in order to feel safe and respected. If they genuinely care about you, they'll listen and adjust their behavior accordingly.
But what if they don't? What if they dismiss your feelings or continue to push your boundaries?
Then it's time to walk away. You deserve to be with people who respect your boundaries and value your well-being.
That's such an important reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new connection, but it's crucial to prioritize your own needs and safety.
Absolutely. And remember, you're not alone in this. We're all susceptible to seduction, to manipulation, to those who might try to take advantage of us.
But by understanding the tactics, setting boundaries, and communicating our needs, we can protect ourselves and cultivate healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Creating connections that are based on mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection.
Absolutely. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed by all this talk about seduction, remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand how seduction operates, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the complexities of relationships.
It's a lifelong process of learning and growing.
And if you're interested in diving even deeper into this topic, we highly recommend checking out Robert Greene's The Art of Seduction. It's a fascinating and insightful exploration of the nuances of human behavior. It's given me a lot to think about, that's for sure.
As we wrap up today's deep dive, I'd like to leave you with a question to ponder. Can you think of a time when you were seduced or maybe even used some of these techniques without realizing it?
It's an interesting question to reflect on because we've all been on both sides of this equation at some point in our lives. And that's what makes this topic so endlessly fascinating.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the complexities of the human experience.